Hi there, everybody. I'm Gabe Lee. I'm the Family Programs Coordinator here at Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation. In this video, I'll be showing off our poetry finder, as well as talking about some potential activities that we can be doing with the poetry. So for those who don't know, Angel Island is covered in poetry. Why is that? Well, it was a former immigration detention center specifically meant to keep out Chinese immigrants. And while those Chinese immigrants were here, oftentimes for days, weeks, or months, they would often write poetry. And then they would carve it into the walls of the detention center. This was a form of protest for Chinese people at the time, as well as a way to just pass the time. Immigration officials at the time obviously thought that this was vandalism. So they covered up a lot of the poetry using wood putty, using paint, and then of course over time, people forgot about it. People didn't want to talk about Angel Island, but it was then found, and now it's being shared again with the public. Our poetry finder is meant to show you where all of these different poems are. There's a lot of poems. And you can find it both on site, on the island, as well as on our website. So in order to get to our website, you get to type aiisf.org, and then you'll go to this tab up at the top of our homepage that says education, and then you'll go to poetry, and that'll take you right to this page that I'm currently on. If you are on the island, if you're at the site, there will be QR codes throughout the site that you can scan, and it'll take you directly to some of the pages I'm about to show you. Now, before I get ahead of myself, I'd like to thank the folks that did a lot of the translations that you're about to see. So we're going to scroll down here. So we've got Island, the Poetry and History of Chinese Immigrants on Angel Island, which was translated and edited by Him Mark Lai, Jenny Lim, and Judy Young, as well as Voices of Angel Island, Inscriptions in Immigrant Poetry, that was written by Charles Egan. So both of those two books are great sources for the poetry, but here we've collected a lot of those poems. We've mapped them out onto the walls, and now we've made it available for you all to see. What is also super cool is that we have audio recordings for a lot of these poems, which, again, I'd like to thank our dialect readers. So for Cantonese, we have Calvin Ong. For Domun, we have George Chin. Fa Yin was read by Mr. Jiang. For Heungsan, we've got Qing Manhing, and also for Heungsan and Longdu, we have Dr. Guoren Li. Samyat was read by Yat Guoyan, and then Toisanese was read by Yu Pun Ying. These people have made it super awesome job of making it so that you can understand exactly what these poems mean, and it really brings you into what it was like to be an immigrant who was detained on Angel Island. Now, how does the Poetry Finder work exactly? You get to this page, or you scan a QR code, and then it will bring you to here. You can scroll down a little bit, and you'll find different rooms, right? So room 105 is one of the Chinese men's dormitories, and it's basically the first room you get to, right? You can see on this map, you enter through the barracks, and then you'll end up in room 105. And then from here on this page, the room 105 page, you'll scroll down and you'll see all of these different walls. Now you might be looking at this and you might be thinking, I don't know what these all mean, right? What is N1? What is E2, right? These are the directions of the walls, and the directions are going to be based on that front door. So for room N1, or for wall N1, that is, it'll be the wall that is directly to the left of the room, or directly to the left of the door, right? So you enter to your left, that's going to be N. And then the 1 refers to the first section of the wall. The sections are usually divided by the windows. Sometimes they're not. Again, this is where that QR code is helpful if you're on site, because the QR code will take you directly to the wall section that you're standing in front of. But when you get there, you get to see what poems are on the wall, right? So we can see here we have a poem right here. This is called Voices 20. And then we have a poem right here. This is called Island 133. Those naming conventions are based off of the books that they were translated from. So Voices comes from Voices of Angel Island. Island comes from Island. And then we can scroll down and we have a clearer view of what the poem would look like, right? Again, so when you're at the site, you might be kind of squinting a little bit to try to figure out what these characters are, just because they are under several layers of paint and under a little bit of wood putty, right? And then from here, you have the Chinese as well as the English. And then at the bottom, you have that audio that we mentioned earlier. But that's for basically every room. Now, what are some different ways we can use this for activities, right? Obviously, we can go through and we can look at every poem that we want. So if you want, you can just let your students, or if you're on a tour, you can open it up. You can see what poems are there. Just kind of let the audio wash over you and really experience what it was like to be in the detention center. You can also read the poems and maybe connect some themes, right? The Poetry Finder is great because as we were collecting these poems from these different books, we noticed that, at least for Island, they noticed that the poems were written in a collection of different themes, right? Topics, subjects, mood and attitude towards detention, right? And so we have a list of common themes that show up, but maybe you want your students to make links and connections on your own, right? So maybe that's something you can do. Or you can look at these themes. We can search them up because we do have a search bar right here. And you can have them write poems that are based off of those themes using the poems that were written on Angel Island as their source material, as inspiration, right? A lot of these poems in the kind of homesickness category right here are poems to another person, right? So maybe that's something that's really an interesting activity to work with, whether that's writing a poem to a past immigrant or somebody in the future, because some of these poems were written as warnings, as advice to people that were coming into the barracks. If we're learning a bit more about Chinese, right, the style of the poetry is really important, and that's maybe something that you want your students to learn about, right? We can talk about the ways in which these poems were constructed, whether that's the handwriting, whether that's the number of words used, their styling choices, right? Those are some really interesting ways to use the poetry. And of course, there's the normal way that most of the people interact with the poetry, which is just, what does it make you feel, right? If you're just reading the poems, if you're looking through it, how does that make you feel? And maybe you can write your own poetry based off of that feeling. There's also some interesting points here that we can talk about with like the ways that language influences it, right? So maybe if you're listening through all of these different dialects, maybe you can notice something different about the way a Cantonese reader might read this poem versus somebody who reads Longdu, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can use the poetry, and the Poetry Finder makes it so much easier for you to get a hold of all of that information, especially since it's not super accessible. But again, the Poetry Finder is available on our website. It is free to use, and it's also available on Angel Island itself. So again, QR codes in the windows, and that way you can find all of these poems. I hope that this video was helpful, and I hope to see you all out on the island someday.